All right, so here is our first week. We're doing chapter 1 and 2 of Dr. Peter Attia's great book, Outlive. And my overall first impression of the first two chapters are this dude cares. I'm just going to go out on a limb here. So recently I watched a pretty much a takedown of Elon Musk and, you know, Zuckerberg and all the other intelligent people out there, you know, self-proclaimed, you know, perception managing intelligent people, by Adam Conover, who's very well respected for Adam Ruins Everything in the series he's done about that among academics. But he, you know, let himself go off the chain and just literally call them morons that we allow to influence our decisions and our public policies and all kinds of things. And the reason I bring it up is not to go attack Elon and you know, whoever else, but it's to draw a contrast between idiots like that who have zero education, zero investment, and have been largely silver spoon their whole life, to people who have actually made very tough decisions their whole life and been actively and totally committed to education, seeking the truth and seeking the scientific method. The contrast between an individual like Peter Attia, MD, and these other pseudo intellectuals who fight over Twitter and shit and still influence public policy is just so stark and so important. And actually, we're going to get into some specific reasons as to why I think that is. I'm going to give you some specific examples, life stories from Peter himself, which I didn't know. You know, he's 50. You never know by looking at him, right? You never know by looking at him. I'm 55, so we have a generational bond in that. It's funny. I did watch a documentary. I think it was on Netflix. About, it's not really a documentary. It was just kind of a fun foray into what does it mean to be Gen X, right? And of course, I'm Gen X, right? And one of the defining characteristics of Gen X is cynicism and trying to find a different way to do something. And, you know, because you just have to watch it to understand. But the conclusion is that we tend to be very cynical and very hard to convince of anything, and very, very, very suspicious of anybody who claims authority about anything ever. I mean, I know that describes a lot of people, but our generation in particular, and I'm proud to say I am, you know, a Gen X, and I'm in, you know, the same category as Peter. So when I read his rhetorical style, and, you know, when I see his kind of type A obsession with changing the status quo, I just really, really respond to that. I'm having a lot of really good experiences just kind of relating to the dude at a good level. I mean, it's something that I think is it's always bad to label, but still it's fun. Something that's particularly notable is our, not just our cynicism, but our use of occasional profanity mixed with, you know, an educated, you know, grammatical style and everything. And so he's this guy, right? We have no reverence for anything, man. We're like taking everything down. It's almost like if you took the hippie generation and gave him an actual education. I know, I did it. I went there. I'm sorry. I can't help it. So anyway, this is what I read today, just to remind everybody. So if you haven't read it, I read the introduction. I read part 1. It turns out there's only one more chapter. There's only chapter 3 in part 1, and then it's on to part 2. So we'll be on to part 2 by next week. I have been trying to decide whether we want to move to part 2 now, or we don't want to. A couple questions from the chat. What are we reading? So for those of you who don't know, I am doing a podcast series on reviewing the book Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, which is on the screen. And this is the book that we are reading together. If you want, you can go back to my YouTube channel, and I do have the first one, the reason that I chose to read this, and a little bit of a planning session that we did last week. So this is going to be like a weekly, chapter or two readings. It's not anything more than you could potentially listen to in an audiobook. And we talked about encouraging you to buy a copy if you want to. So chapter 1 says the long game, from fast death to slow death. And the hard part for me doing this is that there's so much good stuff in here that I want to actually cover it all. But I am going to try to limit myself. I'm watching my time like a hawk. I do not want to go over an hour. So I do want to read this story from him. I think this is a story that kind of gives a sense of where he's coming from. And I'm actually going to read it directly at the risk of, bordering over into copyright infringement. Peter, if you ever watch this, I want to give, this is just me processing it. I hope that I don't violate. If you ever feel like I read too much or cross the line, I'd appreciate you letting me know, because I want to respect this hard work you've done to produce this book. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it. And the rest of it we'll skip around. Peter starts by saying, "I'll never forget the first patient who I ever saw die. It was early in my second year of medical school, and I was spending Saturday evening volunteering at the hospital, which is something the school encouraged us to do. But we were only supposed to observe, because by that point you just knew enough to be dangerous. At some point, a woman in her mid-30s came into the ER complaining of shortness of breath. She was from Palo Alto, a pocket of poverty in that very wealthy town. While the nurses snapped to set up the EKG leads on her and fitted her with an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth, I sat by her side, trying to distract her with small talk. What's your name? Do you have kids? How long have you been feeling this way? All of a sudden, her face tightened with fear as she began gasping for breath. Then her eyes rolled back and she lost consciousness. Within seconds, nurses and doctors flooded the ER bay and began running a, quote, code on her, snaking a breathing tube down her airway and injecting her full of drugs in a last-ditch effort to resuscitate her. Meanwhile, one of the residents began doing chest compressions on her prone body. Every couple of minutes, everyone would step back and an attending physician would slap defibrillator paddles on her chest, and her body would twitch with the immense jolt of electricity. Everything was precisely choreographed. They knew the drill. I shrank into a corner trying to stay out of the way, but the resident doing the CPR caught my eye and said, "Hey man, can you come help me over here and relieve me? Just bump on the same rhythm and force as I'm doing, okay?" So I began doing compressions for the first time in my life on someone who was not a mannequin, but nothing worked. She died right there on the table as I was still pounding on her chest. Just a few minutes earlier, I'd been asking about her family. A nurse pulled her sheet over her face, and everyone scattered just as quickly as they arrived. This was not a rare occurrence for anyone else in the room, but I was freaked out. I was horrified. What the hell had just happened? I would see many other patients die, but the woman's death haunted me for years. I now suspect that she probably died because of a massive pulmonary embolism, but I kept wondering what was really wrong with her. What was going on before she made her way to the ER? And would things have turned out differently if she had had better access to medical care? Could her sad fate have been changed? Later, as a surgical resident at Johns Hopkins, I would learn that death comes at two speeds, fast and slow. The inner city Baltimore, fast death ruled the streets, meted out by guns, knives, and speeding automobiles. As perverse as it sounds, the violence of the city was a feature of the training program. While I chose Hopkins because of its excellence in liver and pancreatic cancer surgery, the fact that it averaged more than 10 penetrating trauma cases per day, mostly gunshots and stabbing wounds, meant that my colleagues and I would have ample opportunity to develop our surgical skills repairing bodies that were too young, too poor, black, and male. If trauma dominated the nighttime, our days belonged to patients with vascular disease, GI disease, and especially cancer. The difference that these patients, quote, wounds, were caused by slow-growing, long undetected tumors. And not all of them survived either. Not even the wealthy ones. The ones who were on the top of the world. Cancer doesn't care how rich you are or who your surgeon is, really. If it wants to find a way to kill you, it will. Ultimately, these slow deaths ended up bothering me even more. But this is not a book about death, quite the opposite, in fact. So I'm going to pause there. It's kind of unfair to Peter to leave you hanging on that. But that really sets the tone. So um, I'm going to, just for the sake of those listening, I'm going to, because some of you are not going to read the book, I'm going to paraphrase um, some of the stuff that comes up after that. So Peter talks about his life, and the best I can derive from his life is that, first of all, he obviously came, I don't know this for sure, but he obviously came from a situation of wealth. Um, he's had quite an interesting life, and I'll let you read about it. If you want to, you really should read about it. So he entered the medical profession. He went through Johns Hopkins, and he goes through all of his medical work through a residency, gets his MD and everything. And he actually talks about this in the first chapter, so we'll get to it in a bit. But the spoiler is that he ends up leaving the medical profession because he just can't take it. He's like, this is so fucked up. He doesn't say that, but that's definitely what he's thinking. And he has a specific case. And I'm actually going to jump ahead to that case. So that's a good story. I mean, the point of the first couple chapters, in my opinion, is to get a sense of who this person is, who Peter is, why is he writing this. And just like any cynical Gen Xer, I want to know where he's coming from before I listen to him, right? Otherwise, I'm going to put the book down. I'm going to go find somebody who actually matters. I'm here to tell you that based on what I've read from Peter's experience, this dude actually matters. I mean, he really matters. So branding aside, I mean, he's obviously given into the branding thing a little bit because he really legitimately feels like people's lives are at stake. And I really relate to that because he's, in fact, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Several times during the first chapter, I found myself directly relating to what he's saying about attacking the status quo, don't get mad, get busy. That defines Peter's life decisions. Because he could have gotten mad, he could have gotten jaded, and he continued to make choices that led him away from, the traditional cushy jobs and stuff like that, and toward whatever it took to make the necessary change in our world today. And when we talk about Medicine 3.0, he talks about 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We'll get there in a bit. But when he talks about that, you really get a sense of it. So having just gone through that first story, right, I think it's important that we jump to, this is not written chronologically like this in the book, but I'm going to net out the stories that he tells about himself in the book really quickly in these first few chapters. So the first story he tells is about that, his sense, his first, brush with death. And the second story he tells is about, it's actually kind of funny. His wife, so Peter is obsessed with triathlons and swimming in particular. He's swum the Channel. He's a really high-end athlete, right? He's been swimming his whole life. And I was a triathlete at Nike, so I relate to that. And I always thought that made me healthy, and just the fact that I was going at it, and doing all of these things. But then one day when he was with his family, after completing a 15-mile swim, his wife makes a comment to him. And I want to find it, but I'm thinking. Let me see if I can find it. It's really funny. Let's see. She makes this kind of comment at him. Oh God, where is it? Modern medicine. I should have put it. I didn't mark this one. Oh, here we go. On September 8, 2009, a day I'll never forget, I was standing on the beach of Catalina Island with my wife, Jill, and she turned to me and said, "Peter, I think you should work on being a little less not thin." Oh, I snorted. Oh, my God. I love that. That is so funny. I mean, they've been married for a while, you can tell, right? So his wife says, "Peter, I think you should work on being a little bit less not thin." As soon as I read that, I thought, oh, he's going to tell me a story about how he got out of shape and everything, right? No. Listen to this. I was so shocked that I nearly dropped my cheeseburger. "Oh, Peter, you're wonderful. Less not thin? What is my wife? Why would she say that?" I was pretty sure that I'd earned that cheeseburger as well as the Coke in my other hand, having just swum from the island to this island from Los Angeles across 21 miles of open ocean. 21 miles. He swam 21 miles across open ocean. And his wife tells him he needs to be less thin. I mean, he needs to be less not thin. How about that? That's so funny. not enough cheeseburger, a journey that had taken me 14 hours with the current in my face most of the way. A minute earlier, I had been thrilled to have finished this bucket list thing, and now suddenly I was not thin Peter. Oh, God, that's so funny. Nevertheless, I instantly knew Jill was right. Without even realizing it, I had ballooned up 210 pounds, a solid 50 more than my fighting weight as a teenager. And like a lot of middle-aged guys, I still thought of myself as a, quote, athlete, even though I squeezed my sausage-like body into a 36-inch pants. But that pretty much describes me. Last year, before February, I'm still working. My calendar, I just got a calendar notification yesterday that said, you should have lost 55 pounds by today, because I set it like in January sometime. And I've lost 3/4 of that. I did. I've lost 3/4. I lost 12 kilos. I actually I lost 13 kilos and I put another kilo back on last week in muscle. So yeah. Wait, 14 hours, somebody from the chat says, I get hungry every 6 hours. I know. What did he eat on his 14-hour swim? There's like so many unanswered questions that we want to corner him and ask him those questions. Anyway, he was a proud owner, and I quote, of a full-fledged dad bod, and I had not even hit 40. Blood tests revealed worse problems, the ones that I could even mirror. Despite the fact that I had exercised fanatically and ate what I believed to be a healthy diet, I had somehow become insulin resistant. And this is going to be, I can tell already, because I've seen Peter talk about other things in Zone 2 and stuff. I know that this is going to be a central theme for health span, which is a word we're going to talk about later that he uses. Insulin resistant. All right. What does that even mean, right? So I happen to know, but I don't want to get into it. I want to let him explain it. So he found out, he went ahead and got tested, even though he'd done this amazing athletic achievement. And he was one of the first steps down the type 2 diabetes route. His T levels were shown below the 5th percentile for a man of his age. This is a guy who just, you know why? Probably because he was overly stressing his body. Did you know when you produce cortisol, your testosterone goes down? There's the medical person on the team. One of the teams, there's a video on this, and they have the chief medical professional from a professional cycling team. And one of the things they take blood tests for regularly, like every week, is they check T levels and they check cortisol, because when your stress hormone goes up, either because of exercise and overtraining or because of just stress, emotional stress, your cortisol goes up. And when cortisol goes up, your T levels, your testosterone goes down. It's like a balanced scale. It always goes down. And if your T levels go down, you can't recover. It's like a cycle. So, in fact, he actually alludes to it a little bit here in the first 2 chapters. But one of the things that preventative medicine, is actually sleep. And he talks about how important it is to get sleep. So there's just so much to cover here. I'm going to try to skip through it. So your muscles can't eat because insulin isn't getting into the muscles exactly. Should be the same as diabetes. Yes. So the last story he tells, so there's a story about him learning from Jill, his wife, that he needs to be less, not thin. And then the last one was him saying, fuck medicine, I don't want anything to do with it. So I'm going to read you that part. I'm kind of reading his story, and then he's using the story to communicate some important things that are setting up the stage for the rest of the book. That content, we're going to talk about that right after this, right? So I want to finish his stories, kind of one after the other. He says here, I don't remember what the last straw was for me growing frustration with medical training, but I do know that the beginning of the end came with a courtesy of a drug called gentamicin. Did I get that? Gentamicin. Late in my second year of residency, I had a patient in the ICU with severe sepsis. That means you've got, bacteria and stuff in your blood. He was basically being kept alive by this drug with a powerful IV antibiotic. The tricky thing about this is that you had a very narrow window. If you did too much or too little at the wrong time, it would destroy his kidneys and hearing. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So me being something of an obsessive math geek, actually more than a little bit, one evening I came up with a mathematical model that predicted exactly the precise time when the patient would need the next dose, which would be 4:30 a.m. Sure enough, 4:30 came around and we checked and he needed a dose. Then I went in to go give the dose. But there was a trainee who was a level above us who in the rest of the hospital, and she said, I wouldn't do that. Just have them give it at 7 and when the next nursing shift came. This puzzled me because we knew this patient was going to not make it for 2 more hours, basically unprotected from the mask infection and kill him. Why wait? So when that person left, I had the nurse give the medicine anyway. Later that morning at rounds, I presented the patient to the attending physician and explained what I had done and why, and I thought she would appreciate my attention to patient care, getting the drug dose just right. But instead, she turned and gave me a tongue lashing and said I'd never experienced. I've been awake for more than 24 hours at this point, but I wasn't hallucinating. I was getting screamed at, even threatened for being fired for trying to improve the way we deliver medication to a very sick patient. True, I disregarded the suggestion, not a direct order from the fellow, my immediate superior, and that was wrong, but the attending's tirade stunned me. Shouldn't we always be looking for a better way to do things? Ultimately, I put my pride in check and apologized for this disobedience, but this was just one incident of many. As my residency progressed, my doubts about my chosen profession continued to mount. Time and again, my colleagues and I find ourselves coming into conflict with a culture of resistance to change. A culture of resistance to change. Sound familiar? How about traditional education? Resistant to change. You got to take those SAT tests. You got to do this shitty AP exam. You got to pack 40 people into a classroom. You don't have individualized instruction. All the things that are broken about modern education that I rant about all the time. A culture of resistance to change. There is a good reason why medicine is conservative in nature, of course, but at times it seems to me that the whole edifice of modern medicine was so firmly rooted in its tradition that it was unable to change even slightly, even in ways that would potentially save lives of people for whom we were supposed to be caring. If there's something that describes, in my opinion, the Gen X contribution to society, I think that's going to be it. I mean, there's been lots of contributions by different generations over the years, and we are breaking the status quo. We are taking on the status quo. We are sticking it to the man without doing drugs. We're sticking it to the man by doing science, by working hard, by getting busy instead of mad, by throwing off a fantastic career in medicine and finance, which we'll read about in just now, in order to make as best a difference as we possibly can in this existing system. And that's what he did. So he said, by my 5th year, I told me my doubts. I informed my superiors that I would be leaving in June. My colleagues and mentors thought I was insane. Almost nobody leaves a residency, certainly not from Johns Hopkins. With only 2 years left, but no one could dissuade me, throwing 9 years of the medical training out the window. I took a job with McKinsey & Company, an investment firm, a well-known management consulting firm. My wife and I moved to the country we moved to the posh playground in Palo Alto in San Francisco, where I lived, which I loved. It was about as far away from medicine in Baltimore as I was about to get, and it was glad. I felt as if I'd wasted a decade of my life, but in the end, this seemingly detour ended up reshaping the way I took a look at medicine, and more importantly, each of my patients. He tells a story that I want to read, but I'm going to paraphrase. What time is it? It's 2:27. Okay, I have to look at my time. He tells a story where right before the crash of 2009, which is covered in the Big Short, which he references. I really love that. he has a natural brain for math, obviously, and so he was put in charge of analyzing risk in this organization, and he was for a particular big bank, and he went through and he would create these mathematical models to establish risk. And in the process, he uncovered with the same things that the Big Short uncovered, the people in the Big Short uncovered, that every bank that had been dumping money into subprime mortgages and stuff like that was about to lose all the profits and more that it had gained, that to lose more profits than it had gained in the last 10 years because of the incoming real estate catastrophe, which ended up happening in 2009, 2010. And he says here, I'll read this here. He had to bring this news. He was put in charge of making a mathematical model to help them deal with this risk so they could use it as an investment tool and they could make money on it and they could keep using it. And instead he ends up discovering that the whole system is about to die from cancer, effectively, metaphorically. And so he went in to give him this knowledge. He was just terrified. He's like, he's relatively new at the job and he's going to tell him, your bank is going to die. And so he says, for some reason they picked me, quote, based on your previous career choice, he said, I suspect you are better prepared to deliver truly horrible news to people. I'm sorry. Your son is going to die. This was not on delivering a terminal diagnosis. I stood up in the high conference room and walked to the bank's management team, and I walked them all the way through the numbers and foretold their doom. As I went through the presentation, I sat there and personally observed the 5 stages of grief as documented by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book, classic book on death and dying: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. Flash across, all these things came across the executive's face. I had never seen that happen before outside of the hospital. Oh, you want me to do a mathematical model about how you can avoid risk and live long as a bank? I'm about to tell you that you have cancer and you're going to die in 5 years. He had to tell the bank that they had cancer. Poor guy. My detour into the world of consulting came to an end. But it opened up my eyes to a huge blind spot in medicine. And that is the understanding of risk. And actually, where's my pen? This is a big theme. You can already tell this is a huge theme with him, and I it's part of it, the main message that he talks about a little bit later. And we have 30 minutes to go, so I'm going to shift over to the actual messages here. In finance and banking, understanding risk is key to survival. Great investments do not take on risk blindly. They do so with a lot of knowledge about the risk and the reward. A study of the credit risk is a science, albeit an imperfect one, and I learned a lot from the banks. While risk is obviously important in medicine, the medical profession often approaches risk more emotionally than analytically. The trouble began with hypocrisies. Most people are familiar with the term, oh, this is so funny. I love this paragraph. Most people are familiar with the term from hypocrisies. First, do no harm. It succinctly states the physician's primary responsibility, which is to not kill our patients and do anything that might cause their condition to worse. Yeah, that makes sense. There are 3 problems with this. Pay attention. This is so funny. There are 3 problems with this. A, Hippocrates never said these words. B, it's sanctimonious bullshit. And C, it's unhelpful on multiple levels. Do no harm? Seriously? Many of the treatments deployed by our medical forebears from Hippocrates' time as well into the 20th century have been anything more like doing harm. Did your head hurt? You need a hole in your head. Strained sores on your private parts? Let's put mercury on them. And of course, there was the millennia-old standby of bloodletting. By the way, the whole do no harm thing, check it. Here's a note down here below. The words first do no harm did not appear in Hippocrates' actual writings. He urged physicians to, quote, practice 2 things in your dealings with disease, either help or do not harm the patient. This was changed by a rich aristocratic 19th century British surgeon to first do no harm, Thomas Inman, whose other claim to fame was, well, nothing. So the thing that everybody repeats first do no harm is total bullshit. I love that. That's so Gen X. That's so Gen X. Yeah, bloodletting. We don't want that. Basically, he goes down the whole thing and the whole do no harm stuff. He takes that on. He says, I actually I kind of wish Hippocrates was here to witness the miracle of modern medicine. He talks, and he tells a story about a time when he had to do harm because a stab wound victim had come in and their pericardium had filled with pressure and it was stopping his heart in the elevator. And they literally they had seconds before they could relieve it, or he would totally die right there. And he took his scalpel blade and he cut into the guy's chest in the elevator to relieve the pressure, and it restored his breathing and it restored his heart, and it just was spewed blood everywhere, like everywhere. And they found out later that he nicked an artery, but he did harm in order to save because he weighed it against the risk. And so he's making the point of sometimes you have to do harm to even at great risk because it's way better than if he hadn't done it, he would have died. So, make up for women mercury. Oh, I know. Isn't that crazy? So and then there's this, he shares the super sad story here. Consider the case. He talks about, okay, so, all right, I'm kind of, let's see. How many minutes do I have? I mean, it'd better if you just read the book. Just read the book. I mean it. I'm not making any money on the book. I think you should read it. The first chapter is him, actually, here we go. So the first chapter, he's setting the stage for lifespan and health span. And that's going to become something, obviously you can pick out what that means, right? And he talks about the 4 horsemen. So I wanted to mention these two. The 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen are slow killing diseases. I'm going to paraphrase. So medicine 1.0 was, keep people alive basically. And very reactive. Medicine 2.0 was largely antibiotics, right? So you'd get sick and you'd douse the disease with drugs and shit, right? And we're still largely living in medicine 2.0. And medicine 3.0 is the proactive stuff where you can detect in advance all that stuff. And that is the new normal. And that's where we're going. And then he talks about toward medicine 2.0. So actually here, I'm kind of bouncing around, but oh well. So here is a graph. He shows a graph of how medicine 2.0 got rid of tuberculosis and a bunch of other stuff, and it kind of eliminated all those infectious diseases, but it still left the 4 horsemen. And you can probably guess what the horsemen are. You want to take a guess? What are the 4 top slow-killing diseases? What are they? They continue to be. They've always been, by the way, even before we knew about them. So the top 4, stress. They're all exacerbated by stress. So the number 1 of the 4 horsemen is heart disease. You can probably guess the next one. Cancer. Number 3, neurodegenerative diseases, and that includes Alzheimer's. And type 2, and then the last one is metabolic dysfunction and type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases like, going crazy, dementia and stuff like that, and type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, we know, insulin and all that jazz. Longevity has 2 components. He doesn't like the word longevity. He says it's been taken over by charlatans, but he still has to use it anyway. So the first is how long you live. That's longevity, is how long you live. That's your lifespan. And the second is how well you live. That's your health span. And he talks about our generation in particular having observed people who have lived a long time but suffered with dementia and put stress on the family because they're expensive, and they just keep on living, and you're like, I wish you would die. You don't want to say that, but it's like, So that's the old version of longevity is, oh yeah, hey, we're going to live a long time. But God, I hope they make, physician assisted suicide a thing. I am not going to put a huge burden on my family. If I lose my neurological functions and I'm putting extensive amount of financial stress on my family, I want to check out. I don't want to be here. I'm not that into, when I was Mormon, I want to get into it, but when I was Mormon, we used to believe that the suffering of the old is part of God's plan to help you learn what kind of person you are. And it gave us opportunities for service and shit. That's bullshit. That's total bullshit. Nobody wants to suffer. No, so prolonging someone's suffering is like, please just let me die, Look, the question is there sometimes you might want to die. I don't want to get into it, but there's sometimes you might want to die. You might think you want to die, but you really don't. You just don't know it in the time, right? But how do you distinguish that from, no, I am at peace, I am okay, and I want to check out? But that's not the topic. That's me saying that. So he's more about saying, don't think about that shit. Think about what you can do today to live a higher quality life, to increase your health span so that well into your 80s, you can have all your cognitive functions. You can have all of your, you can have not the same. Keanu Reeves actually this week sent out a tweet saying how he can't run anymore. Or it was a tweet or something. It was my wife told me. So Keanu Reeves was like, some of the things he can't do anymore. He can't run, right? And I can't run either. I try. It's more of like a fast shuffle when I run because I don't recover from it because, my connective tissues and stuff, they've worn out and that's fine. And that's not bad, but there's lots of other ways to exercise, right? And you see me bike a lot. Anyway, so he talks about, in chapter 1, he talks about medicine 1.2 and 1, 2, and 3, and how to get to medicine, toward medicine 2.3.0. But here he has like 4 paragraphs. I'm going to read these. Medicine's biggest failing currently is attempting to treat all the conditions at the wrong end of the time scale. He's basically taking a lot of science and stuff and stories to say what we already know. I already knew this part, that we need to do more earlier to live longer, right? This whole reactive versus proactive medicine, that kind of thing, right? There's no such thing, by the way, as proactive medicine. It's like, and he talks about it, the problem with our society, it's not just because capitalism, he talks about that the insurance system is set up. Did you know this? The insurance system will pay for your insulin, but they won't pay for your health club membership. So just to pick a few examples, despite throwing billions of dollars in research funding at the horseman, mainstream medicine has gotten crucial things dead wrong about the root causes. We'll examine some of the promising new theories about the origin of each and possible strategy for prevention. Next paragraph. The typical cholesterol panel that you receive as you discuss your annual thing says good or bad cholesterol. This is misleading and oversimplified to the point of being absolutely useless. It doesn't tell you nearly enough about the actual risk of dying from heart disease, and we don't do nearly enough to stop this killer. Millions of people are suffering from a little-known and underdiagnosed liver condition that is potentially precursor to type 2 diabetes, yet they can't identify it. People in the earliest stages of this metabolic derangement will often return blood tests that look normal. Unfortunately, in today's unhealthy society, normal or average is not the same as optimal. So it's either black or white. You're either good or not. You either have type 2 diabetes or you don't. Or you're pre-diabetic. And then you don't qualify for anything. Right? Or you're told you don't need to do anything until you're diabetic. That's the fundamental target of his attack, is this thinking that, you cross this boundary or this threshold and all of a sudden, you're sick. Right? You've been sick for 10 fucking years and now it's just manifesting in a way that insurance will pay for. But there's markers all along that you can measure, and we aren't measuring, frankly. So the metabolic, almost all diets are similar. They help some people, but prove useless for most. I cannot overstate my agreement with this next sentence. Instead of arguing about diets, we will focus on nutritional biochemistry. Know the combination of nutrients, that you eat and how they affect your metabolism and physiology, and how to use the data and technology to come up with the best eating pattern for you. He talks about individualism in 3.0. We're going to get there later. I'm going to talk about that. But the individualism, I really resonate with that as well, because I've said over and over again, if they could redo our education system so that everybody has one-on-one time with their educator, the whole problem would go away, because everybody learns differently. It's not a spectrum of learning types. It's like every single person has a different body, and we have a different method of learning. We have a different way of reacting to certain foods. Our biochemistries are as different as our facial features, as different as our bodies themselves. We have certain things in common, but every single human being has a different biochemistry. And they're all slightly different. And knowing yours, learning how to identify yours and how to deal with yours should be the primary focus of medicine, but it's not. Because we don't even fucking know who our doctor is, let alone have them have intimate knowledge of who we are and how our bodies work. And so Peter's like, Medicine 3.0, it would be great if I could tell you that, if I knew that information, I had that kind of relationship with you. But if you don't have the money to pay me for that kind of thing, he doesn't say that. You can do it yourself. So we live in a time when, not self-diagnosis, but we have a lot more information to go on. Thank God. Because if we didn't, we certainly don't have a one-on-one relationship with a doctor or a physician of any kind. The whole idea of the family doctor before, at least the family doctor knew your medical history. You can't even tell your doctor if you even need, I can't even tell my doctor's name. 50, 60 life expectancy, yes. Here it goes. One macronutrient in particular demands more of our attention than most people realize. It's not carbs, it's not fat, but protein. It's becoming critically important as we age. And this one, I've got like so many lines under this one, I can't even say it. Exercise is by far the most potent longevity drug there is. No other intervention does nearly as much to prolong our lifespan and preserve our cognitive and physical function. But most people don't do nearly enough, and exercising the wrong way can actually do more harm than good. And I can tell you, I have experienced that in over 50. Over 50, I kept training the way I did when I was a 30-year-old triathlete, and it actually did more harm than good. I ended up getting overtrained. I getting too much chronic inflammation. I was like, I actually went to the doctor and said, what the hell? I'm trying to get healthy again. And she goes, no, you're doing it too hard. Your body's not recovering in between. You need to treat yourself differently, completely differently now that you're over 50. Again, so it's not just knowing your own biochemistry, but it's also knowing your biochemistry at the time you are, right? At the age you are and stuff like that. Finally, as I learned the hard way, striving for physical health and longevity is meaningless if we ignore emotional health. Emotional suffering can decimate our health on every front, and it must be addressed. I can tell you personally that when I have been, that's why I gave up streaming for those months of February when I lost all that weight and I got it healthy. I gave up streaming because, as you know, when I stream, my heart rate goes through the roof, my stress gets insane, and my emotional health just gets decimated because there's so much going on in the world that if I focus on that too much, which I always do, whether it be stupid programming language or, someone's use of tabs, it's that we're dying over. And I know that's hyperbolic, but it absolutely is killing me by letting that shit affect my emotions to the point where I just flooded my body with cortisol where I could have flooded my body with dopamine and serotonin. And I could have taken that moment to take a nap instead or something, or to just chill. And, people always say, oh, that's the touchy-feely medicine. It's like, oh, what are we going to do? Like sing Kumbaya and put, incense on or some shit? Do I need to go to church? Was that what you're saying? Is that going to help my emotional? No, it won't actually. So we really do need to think about our emotional health and, how many bonds do we have with others, community. I'm sure he's going to get into that. Believe it or not, as much as I complain on Twitch, this community has provided a level of emotional well-being that I did not have before Twitch. And that's not an ad for Twitch, for God's sake. It's connecting with people who make me laugh. It's connecting with people who understand the challenges I'm facing and care. These are the kind of human beings that I have a very hard time making a connection with in real life, I guess. I consider Twitch real life, frankly, because it's, much more than Second Life, which I was also obsessed with for a while. Anyway, so we're approaching the final 10 minutes here of this particular first chapter read. I am not doing this credit, and I realize that that's going to be a fault of this particular format that I'm using in this podcast, is I'm just bouncing around, and I'm definitely not doing Peter's, Peter justice. I mean, he's obviously he puts a story in the right place, and then he makes a point, and then he moves on. And I'm just highlighting all the stuff that I like. So if you want the real thing, I suggest you go get it and read it. I did make some comments there. I'm just going to completely randomly read them. And we'll go from there. So, this is how I see my role. So, and this is actually kind of a good summation of where he ended up landing and why he's got a YouTube channel and why he's got, these books and stuff, and why he's chosen to market himself and stuff to get his name out there. This is how I see my role, he says. I am not a laboratory scientist or a clinical researcher, but more I am a translator, helping you understand and apply these insights. And when I heard him say that, I put in the margin here, similar to guiding people through tech. I think the world needs more guides. I love that he uses guide and translator. I often say that, beginners in particular, they need guidance to get through. They need to know how to navigate from somebody who's got experience. And this harkens back to these age-old ideas of education and information and knowledge sharing that go back as far as humans have existed. The one true way to transfer knowledge and skill is to first have the knowledge and skill, and second, to take on a single person at a time and help them understand it. Whether it be guiding them through the jungles of the Amazon and knowing what pitfalls to avoid, or learning how to navigate Silicon Valley if you choose to do that, or why you shouldn't do that, or whether it's knowing how to identify, the beginnings of a blunted insulin response and potentially type 2 diabetes down the road. Every one of these things benefits from having a personal guide who cares about you. And I think one of the things that I really like about the, quote, sharing economy, I forget the name of the economist who coined that term, the sharing economy, as opposed to the traditional economy, is this. It's what we're doing right now. I share and you decide it's worth something, and then you put it out there. And writing a book, to some degree, is part of the sharing economy. It's not really sustainable to make all your money from a book. But the idea of the sharing economy is you share and then, something comes of it. But I suppose the refinement of the sharing economy is that you share with one person specifically, or 2 or 10 individually, and you help them to grow, right? And I think actually one of the reasons I do like this book is I'm reminded of, I shit on books all the time, not because of their content, but because of the format. Because in technology, the book can never keep up, right? So people are paying 50, 60, 80 bucks for a book that's immediately out of date. It doesn't make any sense. But books like this nonfiction book, medical book from Peter, make sense, right? And I'm reminded of the intimacy of the book format. In fact, I actually was super excited I got this light. Yeah. You remember in the old days, back in the 80s, if you got like a book like this, you were lucky to get an hour out of it, and then you'd be under the covers and it would like go dead, right? But now I'm showing a book light. This book light has 80 hours of power, and it's got this really high power LED in it. I love living in the future sometimes. It's really awesome. I bought my wife one. It's her favorite color. Yeah. Anyway, so I've been really enjoying reading like actual books. That works for the Kindle too, right? If you don't have a light background color Kindle. So I'm reminded that that books are a form of mentorship. Now, they obviously can't cater to you, right? But they do allow a more intimate connection with what you're reading. So I appreciate that because, I thought Peter was going to be maybe full of shit. I was like, oh, hey, another internet doctor. Great. But reading, he does a good job sort of building a relationship with the reader, and I really appreciate that. Understanding the risk. Okay. I thought I read that one already. Let me see if I missed anything else here. Oh, okay. So there's a number of historical things that have happened that I was unaware of, and I actually shared this one with my wife, and she's like, oh yeah, I know about that. She does that a lot. Consider the case of poor Ignaz Semmelweis, a Vietnamese. So this is medicine 2.0 before they understood germs, right? A Vietnamese obstetrician who was troubled by the fact that so many new mothers were dying in a hospital. He concluded that the strange, quote, child bed fever might somehow be linked to the autopsies that his colleagues were performing in the morning before they would deliver babies in the afternoon without washing their hands between. Can you imagine? The existence of germs had not yet been discovered, but Semmelweis nonetheless believed that the doctors were transmitting something to the women that was causing them to die. His observations were unwelcome. His colleagues ostracized him, and he died in an insane asylum in 1865. Poor guy. Poor guy. That poor guy. He was dead right. He could have saved all those lives, but those shithead, dogmatic fucking assholes attacked him for it. It's just such a sad story. It makes me so sad. But you know what? I would rather die pushing for what the science indicates than not saying anything. That very same year, this same exact year, this poor story, it's so hard to read. The exact same year that he died in the insane asylum, Joseph Lister, you may know that name, first successfully demonstrated the principles of antiseptic surgery, which meant that used sterilization techniques. It was the first application of germ theory ever. Semmelweis had been right all along, and now the idea of having surgery with instruments that were used in an autopsy an hour ago is laughable. It would get you a malpractice lawsuit. But back then, they were doing it. They thought that was a good idea. They didn't know. Why are these people dying? Why are all these women dying? Oh, it's probably because they're weak. They're women. Women are weak. That's probably what they thought. A bunch of white asshole chopping up. Oh my God, I can't even imagine. Humans thank God we're progressing, right? So the shift, Sir Francis Bacon was the one who articulated first now the known term scientific method, which I have talked about over and over and over again. I think that the only thing we should be religious about is that's kind of a play on words, is our practice of the scientific method. The scientific method is the only thing that without fail has produced human progress, period. Do you know what Hippocrates had to do? Hippocrates' major contribution was the insights that diseases are caused by human nature and not actions from the gods. That was his major contribution. No. It's not that Dionysus wanted him to get sick. Nope, that's not it. What are you saying? What are you saying? You're saying that there's some other reason, that there's actual disease in his body that's completely unrelated to his sins against Dionysus or Zeus or Athena? That's what I'm saying. Oh my God. Run him out of town. Kill him. My God can beat up your God. Plus, if you're sick, it's because your God sucks and my God's stronger than your God. Hippocrates' major contribution was that, guess what? When you get sick, it's from a disease and not from gods hating you. Can we just all agree? You know what, though? You laugh, but when Katrina hit, half of America, 61% of Americans thought that it was God's will to take out all those people. So you laugh. You think Hippocrates had it hard, convincing people gods weren't the ones giving him diseases. But in 2023, people actually believe that there's some fucking aliens possessing QAnon targeted people and that they're running the whole show. So much so that they killed people at the Capitol to try to make their point. And they felt like they were justified by their God. So you can say what you want about us not being the Greeks, but in many ways we are regressing. And I believe it's because of education. I really love Peter Attia because he's personable. He's scientific, and that's where this comment came from. Is he cites Sir Kevin Bacon. He cites Sir Kevin Bacon. Sir Kevin Bacon says, "Let's dance." Oh my God, I've been so infiltrated by pop culture. It's like all over in my brain. I can't even. Sir Francis Bacon, not to be confused with Sir Kevin Bacon. I think Kevin Bacon's probably been knighted at this point, so don't mix the two up. Sir Francis Bacon first articulated what we now know as the scientific method, which is dancing is good for you, by the way. Yeah, dancing is good for you. So anyway, all right, we're almost done here, I promise. So I don't see any other things to go in. Okay, so he did summarize that Medicine 3.0, what it actually means. I'm just going to read the main bullet points from this, and we'll be done for today, and we can go on. So Medicine 3.0, in my opinion, he says, is not really about technology. Rather, it requires an evolution in our mindset, a shift in the way in which we approach medicine. I've broken it down into 4 main points. I mean, the guy is very analytical. I love that about him. First, Medicine 3.0 places a far greater emphasis on prevention than treatment. And I mean, this has been something we've known about for some time, but it's really obviously still the very biggest thing of all. When Noah built the ark, he didn't build the ark right away when it was raining. It's a weird metaphor, but okay. Eat your greens, yes. Second, Medicine 3.0 considers the patient as a unique individual. And that's the point where I was making the association with education. Educational reform would be completely fixed if they started focusing on the individual. Right? Same with Medicine 3.0. The third philosophical shift has to do with our attitude toward risk. In Medicine 3.0, our starting point is an honest assessment and acceptance of risk. He talks about a hormone therapy that was thrown out because it had a 0.01% chance of breast cancer in women, which they later found out had nothing to do with the HRT at all. It was the delivery mechanism of the HRT. He actually has a footnote here. But they threw the whole thing out. They threw it all out. They threw all of the HRT therapy that had been scientifically proven to really help a bunch of women, and because it had a 0.01% risk of breast cancer, which turned out in the end to not be anything to do with it, but the damage had already been done. So risk assessment is not just, that's why he says honest acceptance, including the risk of doing nothing. So in that particular case, if they had done nothing, what would have happened, right? So sometimes it's worth the risk, right? Medicine 2.0 would have thrown out this therapy entirely on the basis of the clinical trial, then try to understand and address the nuances involved. Medicine 3.0 would take this study into account while recognizing its inevitable limitations and built-in biases. So 3.0 says, yeah, okay, let's this is where his risk assessment mathematician in him is coming out. It's like, look, yeah, it's dangerous, but the risks, as long as you know what you're getting into, it's not worth throwing out some of the stuff that does have risk. He uses a lot of other anecdotes here. Anyway. We should be willing to ask deeper questions of risk versus reward versus cost for this therapy. Number 4 of Medicine 3.0. Fourth, and perhaps the largest shift, is that where Medicine 2.0 focuses largely on lifespan, we should be geared more towards which is about staving off death. Medicine 3.0 pays more attention to quality of life, or health span. So it's not just about living long, it's about living well and long. And that, I really, really love that. It's like, I don't want to get old if I can't like walk or see or talk to my wife and remember things about my childhood or my kids and stuff. I mean, I don't want to do that. I would rather be dead. That might be morbid thought, but it's true. Nearly all the money. Okay, this is really sad. I don't want to leave on this. So that whole thing about living, I have to. I just have to. I have to read this part. So he takes that idea of living well versus living long, and he talks about how this is going to require an institutional change, because everything in our system, particularly our health insurance system, is designed to prolong life and not to improve life. Another related issue to longevity itself and health span in particular doesn't really fit into the business model of our current. It does not fit into the business model of our current healthcare system. There are very few insurance reimbursement codes for most of the large preventative interventions that I believe are necessary to extend lifespan and health span. Health insurance companies won't pay a doctor very much to tell a patient to change the way he eats or to monitor his blood glucose level in order to help prevent them from developing type 2 diabetes. Yet insurance will pay for the same patient's very expensive insulin after they've been diagnosed. Similarly, there's no billing code for putting a patient on comprehensive exercise program designed to maintain her muscle mass and sense of balance while building her resistance to injury, all fantastic things that come about from regular physical exercise that insurance will not pay for. Oh, that's not insurance. What are you talking about? But if she falls and breaks her hip, oh yeah, they'll pay for that. Nearly all the money flows to the treatment rather than the prevention. And when I say prevention, I mean prevention of human suffering. Continuing to ignore health span as we have been doing not only condemns people to a sick and miserable older age, but it guarantees to bankrupt all of us eventually. What do you think the chances are of getting our health insurance to pay for our gym membership? I mean, really. They won't even pay when you get sick. What about the fact that they're making money by filling you full of drugs that the pharmaceutical companies are making a shit ton of money on? I'm not hopeful. And then where you just follow the money trail, man. The American medical system is financially incented to keep people sick and addicted. And if you don't believe me, do I need to talk about OxyContin? So at least we got people like Peter Attia on our side who are like, fuck this. Don't get mad. Get busy. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to make YouTube videos. I'm going to do interviews. I am going to do everything in my power to get the information because, as Mandela said, the greatest weapon in war is education. So, and Peter has been a stalwart example of that himself. Every time he wanted to go to battle, he educated himself first. Very much an autodidact, a wonderful human being. I can't wait to someday shake Peter's hand at some point. And I know I'm a fanboy. I'm fanboning. But I mean, if I were. I'm sorry. I'm just going to shut touch. I'm just going to stop talking now. He's also very articulate, not like me. I'm just a mess. I'm totally a mess. But I will say this. I am super grateful that he's put this out there. I'm super grateful I took the time to read it. I'm not reading a lot at any given time. By the way, next week we will read the final chapter 3 of part 1. It's a very short chapter, so I don't know how much of it we can read all the way through, but at some point I did actually kind of want us to be able to talk about it a little bit more. So I am going to take a moment to read through just really quickly on the comments. I have been watching the comments come in as I've been going, and there hasn't been a lot of them. Unfortunately, this is not a popular topic on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch. They make more money from repeated sales, yes, rather than the one-off fix. Eat your veggies, eat your greens. My God can beat up your God. I love that. I'm not an AI, I promise. Basically, it's good to return to monkeys once in a while. I think it kind of is. I know how we went from 50 to 60 life expectancy to 80 or 90 just in a few decades. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to actually go up even more because what Peter is doing is now becoming the new normal. People are talking. I mean, honestly, I guess it's a little bit of a commentary before we go here. But, you know, in a weird way, I wonder if you could credit the absolute disaster of the American healthcare system for some of the rethinking about preventative. Let me follow it up with a personal story. So, you know, I got kind of out of shape last year. Everybody knows this. And worst shape of my life, actually. And it was because I was doing a lot of coding and I had a lot of stress. And a lot of it, frankly, was left over from COVID and all the stress from the election and everything and all the, you know, intense family stresses. I went through 2 different moves and lost a job, had to get a new job. I went through like the stages of stress that are like primarily at the top level, and my health paid for it. And so, you know, since February, January actually, I've been like really working hard to restore my health, and reading Peter's book is kind of a feature of that. But along the process, I've learned a lot, and I feel like that. Hey, Ascertainment. I feel like we are. I feel like. Okay, so during COVID, I went through 8 years with no insurance. I started a business, had no insurance, couldn't pay it. I could not buy insurance for myself, for my family. I have a cancer survivor wife. I have autistic sons, and still could not pay for health insurance. I didn't have the money. So what did I do? And this is the point. What did I do? Well, if I can't pay to go to the doctor, I better damn well do everything in my power to be healthy, right? So sometime in January, February, I realized that even though I did go back to corporate America 2 years ago to get health insurance, mostly during COVID, and to have the extra money to, you know, bail myself out of business debt and stuff like that I'd incurred willingly to try to make a difference in education, all risks that I was perfectly acceptable to take, and the consequences of which I'm perfectly acceptable with today. One of them is, you know, my popcorn ceiling in this apartment. But the point is that because there was no safety net, because there was no health care for me, that meant that I better damn well pay attention to my health. I better do everything in my power preventatively to fix that. And the easy thing for me there is I mean, it's a pretty easy recipe. Eat good food and exercise. You know, it's not tough, right? The type of food and exercise is, you know, yeah, okay, so you got to talk about that, but it's not tough. It's just you got to do it, right? And so the motivation, this is the main point. I was not motivated to do those things as much because I had healthcare, right? I mean, during the last year. So then I started getting out of shape. I'm like, damn. It's like, and it wasn't just this thoughts of my own mortality. It was also like, well, this is going to cost us a lot of money. If I get sick, I just watched another streamer I really like. He's a cyclist. I forget his name. And he was talking about he's got over like $250,000 of medical bills that were all supposed to be paid just from, you know, one crash he did in a bike on a velodrome. It's just insane. But one way to stay, and he even says the same thing. He's like, one of the things you can do to stave off this problem in America in particular is stay healthy, right? Because if the more healthy you are, less doctor visits you're going to have and everything like that. And so in a weird way, and this is the conclusion, in a weird way, not having a good healthcare system to a thinking, logical, intelligent person means I better not get sick. Now, America doesn't have a lot of intelligent, logical thinking human beings. In fact, I would argue that more than 70% of Americans don't qualify for that. Sorry, just look at the numbers. Just watch any late night talk show where they talk to people on the street. Americans are stupid. They don't care to know. They don't want to know. They don't do the research. They just want to do what they want to do and have somebody pick up all the pieces, and they want a solution. And they want to know they're going to heaven if they, even if they do die. Oh, I'll go to heaven anyway. Whatever. I don't want to get negative. It's very hard for me not to get negative, because if you just have to open your eyes to see the shit that's going on, particularly in America. But on a positive note, Peter Attia is not one of those people. Peter Attia is someone who has researched for themselves. It's probably true that he did have a little bit more wealth to start out with than most of us, so he was able to go to Johns Hopkins, for God's sake, and pay for it, But we can still benefit from that, right? There are a lot of rich people like Elon and all the other dicks who are doing things with their money that are taking us down in terms of humanity. So when you occasionally run across a silver spoon, one percenter who also raised everybody with him, along with, his popularity and branding, which is what Peter is doing, I find that very refreshing. And I do want to end on that note. So thank you, Peter, again. We're gonna end the podcast there, and next week again we're gonna be reading chapter 3. So please join us for that. I really hope you do. And we'll talk to you then.